Once upon a time. Welcome to Australian Booklovers, your destination for imagination.
A huge warm welcome to everyone, and an even huger thank you for joining us once again for the Australian Booklovers Podcast. Our mission, as always, is to bring fabulous Australian and Indigenous literature spanning a whole range of genres to book lovers all around the globe, as well as fantastic resources and information for passionate authors looking to write their next bestseller. I am Darren Kazenko, dystopian science fiction and horror author, reader, and one of your hosts and co-founders of Australian Booklovers, coming to you today from Corner Country.
And I'm Veronica Strachan, aka V.E. Patton, fantasy, memoir and picture book writer, reader, and your other co-founder and host, coming to you from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country over here in Victoria.
And we are both coming to our listeners for episode number 51.
51! Man, you're catching up to my age. We may well, in fact, pass very soon. I was just reading an email about my seniors card, which is a little bit hilarious to get a seniors card, but hey, what the heck?
Well, hey, if it saves you money, I'll be a senior too. In this economy, I'll do anything.
Indeed. But yeah, episode 51. So not just 51 authors, but we've spoken to writers' centres and industry experts and a couple of fundraisers, a couple of special events, lots of different people. And 51 episodes is pretty damn significant.
Yeah, I like it. And for me, it's 51 reasons to keep going. So, yeah, to everyone who's helped us get to 51, thank you so much. And, of course, you know that I've recently, should I say, been driving down the rabbit hole of, the hidden meaning in numbers. And yes. I'm onto a little bit of a different source now. I think I'm tapping an even deeper vein.
Yeah.
So, the rabbit hole goes deep, definitely. But, what does the number 51 mean in numerology? We've just discussed what it means to us, and that it means that, many fantastic experiences have been had with many more to come. But in numerology, number 51 is a combination of the vibrational energies of the numbers 5 and 1. Number 5 signifies freedom, adventure, positive change, and the senses a human being possesses. This number shows that you are a highly motivated individual who is willing to do anything to succeed in life. Well, I think that we're willing to do anything to succeed for Australian book lovers, and
Indeed.
By success that means promoting all the wonderful literature that our awesome nation has to offer. So maybe 51 can come in handy. But not only that, the number 51 is a number of family, responsibility, and expression of personal freedom. But this part I think you'll like, Veronica.
Yeah.
51 is a pentagonal number, as well as a centered pentagonal number and an 18 agonal number and a parent number. It is also the 6th Motson number, telling the number of ways to draw non-intersecting chords between any 6 points on a circle's boundary, no matter where the points may be located on the boundary. Now, of course, I suspected that about the number 51.
Of course you did, being
I'm glad
such a mathematically minded person.
Oh, yeah. So, of course, the next part that I learned was even more fascinating, and that is 51 is the international code for direct phone calls to Peru, and is the last possible television channel number in the UHF band plan for American terrestrial television since December the 31st, 2011. So there we go. The number 51. It'll let you call Peru. It'll let you draw lines somehow in mathematical reasons, and is an old UHF channel that may or may not still be around. Yay for number 51.
51 is a good thing.
Yes, absolutely. Well, by the sounds of that there, it has a little few secrets too, because I have no idea what a Motzkin number is.
No, neither have I.
And I'm not going to look into it any further. The mystery is going to stay with that one. But yes, number 51. How about we jump straight to some fantastic news for podcast episode 51?
Indeed, let's do that.
Okay, so obviously as part of the news, the first thing we'd love to dive into is new listings on the Australian Booklovers website. So we've got a couple of non-fictions to tantalise all of our fantastic listeners with this episode. The first book I would like to talk about is called Act Before You Overthink, and that is by an author called Lison Mage. So the blurb or synopsis is, what should I say, reads as follows. Are you an overthinker? Too clever for your own good? Unable to make decisions even after overanalyzing data in enormous spreadsheets? Or feeling stuck and anxious imagining countless what-if scenarios? Act before you overthink to free your mind, skyrocket your productivity and improve your well-being. Based on more than 365 interviews with overthinkers, author Lison Mage uncovers and debunks the 3 myths of overthinking that hold you back from reaching your full potential in your career and relationships. Backing up her findings with psychological studies and behavioural sciences, Act Before You Overthink offers practical strategies and tools addressing the different types of overthinking to break free from stress, self-doubt and perfectionism. You will learn how to gain control over your deepest fears and show up as your most empowered self, balance thinking and doing, setting you on a path to greater joy and purpose, build confidence and decisiveness when facing complex choices. So, don't wait any longer to get out of your own way. It's time to liberate your mind, improve your decisions, and give the world your best self. So that is Act Before You Overthink by author Lison Mage. Now a little bit about Lison. So she's an author, obviously, a corporate facilitator, performance and mindset coach. She works primarily with technology companies to elevate engagement and performance by providing their leaders and teams with practical and science-based strategies and tools to foster a growth mindset and enhance their decision-making processes. She is an ex-engineer. She went through a massive career change after working on 3 different continents in some of the major software companies and to embrace her vocation, which is empowering people and teams to perform at their full potential. So if you're an overthinker, I definitely am guilty of overthinking. That sounds like there could be some, really cool little tricks of the trade in there that could help us out. I'm not sure, I don't know if there's any book out there that's going to stop me overthinking at 3 a.m, but hey, I'll give it a shot. But
perhaps some good habits to get into.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, the other non-fiction book that I'd like to talk about is, it was actually 2 authors that have put this together, but one of them is, very proudly, one of my first interviews for the Australian Booklovers Podcast. So the book is called Teutoburg to Witta, so a unique title there, but it is by authors Dale, Lorna, Jacobsen and Dr. Steve Chaddick. Teutoburg to Witta reads as follows. European settlers arrived on the Blackall Range in the 1880s to carve out a place to live among thick vine scrub. So selection offered them a chance to establish a place of their own, clearing the land using hand tools, felling trees and sawing them into timbers to establish homes and fence small holdings which grew into dairy farms. The predominantly German pioneers named their new home Teutoburg in memory of the forest they left behind. For 30 years they built a community centred around dairy farms and their Lutheran faith. All of that changed, however, in 1916 when, due to anti-German sentiment, Teutoburg was renamed Witta. So that is the basis for the non-fiction book Teutoburg to Witta, hence the change of the name. Now, as far as the authors are concerned, if you're not familiar with Dale, Lorna, Jacobsen, so Dale is a freelance writer with a passion for grassroots history, leading to the publications of 3 novels, so Union Jack in 2011, which was basically political intrigue set in Queensland in the 1920s. Yanahan's Legacy, which was released in 2013. That was a story of love and life in the high country of Australia. And Being Lucy, which was released 2018, the story of a mountain recluse set in East Gippsland. Now, in 2013, she also fulfilled a lifelong dream, taking part in an expedition to Antarctica and produced an e-book based on her adventures, which was called Why Antarctica? A Ross Sea Odyssey, and that was actually released in 2015. Dale has since returned to Antarctica twice now, I think, or maybe even a 3rd time. We're going to find out in the near future. But in 2018, she also published a memoir of a gentleman or explorer called John Russell, and that was basically called Engineer, a memoir of John Russell. Now, her co-author for this book is Dr. Steve Chaddick, who is BAMA PhD. Dr. Janic is an archaeologist, museum expert and anthropologist with 30 plus years experience in the field of cultural heritage. A Witta resident since 2007, he feels a strong attraction to the invisible past in his own backyard and has a passion for sharing these stories. So from 2014 to 2018, he focused on the history of Teutoburg/Witta by surveying public and private archives, reviewing photographic collections, gathering records and recording oral testimonies. In 2015, 2016 and 2018, in partnership with the Witta Recreational Club, he organised a Witta Fest, a free local event celebrating Teutoburg/Witta's unique heritage. So you can be guaranteed, if you really enjoy your history, and especially local history, Australian history, that book will be, expertly researched, and I can only imagine that the quality is absolutely top notch when it comes to recording what was obviously a unique time in history.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my final little part of news today, I wanted to jump to a little bit of a writing competition.
Okay, tell us all about it.
Certainly. So the writing competition is as follows. The Australian/Vogel's Literary Award for 2023 has begun. Now, it is for 2023. However, the closing date for this competition is the 31st of May 2022. So, prize money is $20,000 plus publication of Allen and Unwin with an advance against royalties. So that's a pretty epic prize and a pretty epic competition. Entrants must be aged under 35 years of age on the 31st of May 2022. So that is born after the 31st of May 1987.
Oh, you can just stop there.
Yeah, I'm out.
Don't bother finish there. For the young ones.
Well, I guess I can have a pen name that identifies as a 20-year-old. Now, entrants must be Australian citizens or permanent residents. The manuscript submitted with the entry form should be a work of fiction, Australian history or biography. Must be a minimum length of 50,000 words and a maximum of 80,000 words. And obviously the manuscript must be an original work entirely by the entrant, and it must be written in English. So there is an entry fee of $25 for each manuscript entered. So once again, that's the closing date. It's the 31st of May 2022. The easiest way to learn more about that contest is to visit www.allenandunwin.com. You could even go /being a writer /the Australian Vogel S Literary Award. But just jump to allenandunwin.com and follow the prompts, you'll find it. And that is my news for episode 51.
Very good news. So a couple of quickies before I talk about a fabulous little website that I found. One is that the Aurealis Award finalists, just wanted to mention that Dead Set Press, did I say that weirdly? Dead Set Press have 3 Aurealis Award finalists. So I think that's fantastic for a small indie publisher. So they've got Pamela Jeffs, her story of Slaves and Lions, which is from their Stories of Survival, Australian spec fiction, of course, and that's a finalist in the Best Young Adult Short Story. Tansy Rayner Roberts, and her story was in the same anthology, Stories of Survival. Waybread Rising, and that's also a finalist in the Best Young Adult Short Story category. And Melissa Ferguson, and you'll find Melissa's book in pages of Australian Booklovers, but she is a finalist with For Autumn in the Best Science Fiction Short Story catalogue. So it's just excellent to see emerging indie authors supported by the great Dead Set Press, indie publishers, and they are hitting their straps and getting some really good recognition of their great work.
Well, you could say that Dead Set Press have become Dead Set superstars.
You could indeed, and we won't mention the arachnid. Oh, I've already mentioned it. There you go. That's part of their logo. Let's just move on from that. All right, one more call out for writing, City of Literature, which is Melbourne, they're doing a writer call out. I thought you might like this one because they need any kind of horror, ghost or bizarre story, but it must be set in Melbourne. The deadline is the 30th of May and they'll pay $300, and it must be a new story, and it's going to be published in Butchin Bucheon. But City of Literature are a good responsive tweeter. And you have to email your 50-word pitch to cityofliterature@wheelercentre.com.au by close of business Wednesday.
50-word pitch, huh? Glass dome slams down onto Victoria.
Yeah.
Population sticks hands and face against glass, peering down up at South Australia, longing to be where the sun shines. Behind them, a monster stirs. There we go. No, that sounds like a really cool competition.
If you do happen to miss the deadline on that, just be aware that there's so many great opportunities for short stories. And it's interesting, I've just finished reading N.K. Jemison's book of short stories, and I love her longer stories, and I'm not great at short stories, mostly because I don't write that many. But she mentions in her book that it gives her such an opportunity to explore characters or explore world building or scene setting, you know, as we spoke about in the last episode. And I think, maybe I should give it a bit more of a shot, but I'm still so stuck in the editing of my very long epic fantasy at the moment that it just feels like I couldn't put the energy into a short story. And yet, here, as I mentioned earlier, 3 Australian authors and of course there are many more Australian authors because the Aurealis is an Australian award, who are winning prizes for their work. So there you go.
Yeah, well, I've had a bit of a pause on my writing, which, due to life commitments, and now I'm finding that time to come back to it. So I'm definitely putting together some short stories just to, I guess, sharpen myself back up, get the words flowing again. So that's one thing I love about short stories. 2, I just love writing short stories because, you can explore any ideas. And it's, who knows what short story may become the catalyst for something much bigger or, something to explore more. But rather than sort of, I don't know. I just love it. It's like kind of going for a jog to get the heart rate going up, and, and the jog itself is a fantastic adventure. But the short story competition with regards to horror or ghost stories set in Melbourne. Now, can you live anywhere in Australia and enter the contest?
Yeah.
Oh, yep. Cool. Yeah. Well, there you go.
There you are.
Yeah, fantastic.
So the other thing I wanted to mention is, and I was scrolling through thinking about some research for this episode, the Australian National University, the School of Literature, Languages and Linguistics, SLLL, not easy to say, they have a great couple of pages about Australian words. And I thought, well, look, most of the people that do listen to our podcast are Australian, but we have a good sprinkle of overseas listeners, and also we have a great range of ages who listen. And I find myself now in my 60s that sometimes people don't get the references that I talk about. So I thought, look, let's just have a little look at some of these words. So, meanings and origins of Australian words and idioms. So I've got a couple to share with you today. One is a Zac. So do you know what a Zac is?
I have no idea. I know Zapped, which is a naughty 80s movie, but no, a Zac, no, I don't.
No, Darren, no, that's not what we're talking about at all. No.
I had Scott Baio and it wasn't like too naughty.
Oh, well, no, couldn't have been too naughty. Right, so a Zac, Z-A-C, is a sixpence. So it's probably derived from the Scottish dialect word saxpence. Zac is first recorded in Australian English in the 1890s, and later it's also used to mean a trifling sum of money, as in the phrase, it's not worth a Zac. Have you heard of that?
No.
See, I am really old because I would use that all the time. So while Australians no longer use pounds, shillings and pence since decimal currency was introduced in 1966, and yes, I do remember when Mum brought home the new shiny money, we had to learn it all at school, etc., etc. But we do have long memories, so despite the fact that there haven't been Zacs in wallets for 50 years, the word Zac and the notion that it's not worth a great deal can still be found in, I'm just going to put in brackets, some Australian usage. So in 1945, in the Australian Weekend Book, the only one who backed it had been his wife, who'd had a Zac each way. But in 2006, in The Age in Melbourne, when I started this, I divested myself of anything I owned, he said. I'm not worth a Zac. So there you go. So there's a few bodies around.
Well, I
I'm
think,
gonna give you
we
one
still
more.
use the term when it comes to currency, a penny for your thoughts.
Yeah, yes. So pound shillings and pence are still about. But yeah, no, not a Zach. There you go. All right. What about yakka?
What, hard yakka?
Yes.
Labour, yeah, of course.
Indeed. Okay, so yakka, Y-A-K-K-A, is work or strenuous labour. It's especially used as, exactly as you said it, which is hard yakka. Now, it first occurred in 1840s as a verb meaning to work, and it derives from yaga, meaning work, in the Yagara language of the Brisbane region, Indigenous owners up in the Brisbane region. So yakka found its way into 19th century Australian Pidgin and then passed into Australian English. And there's a few different spelling variants, but it's been used, since the 1890s, and now, of course, in 2020, we still use it. So there you go.
2022.
Yakka and Zach. And I've
Well,
got a whole dictionary full, but I figure two's enough.
Well, yakka, now you've got that, I'm going to embarrass myself, but do you remember the hard yakka?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God, that's such a bad song. But then I'm wondering if it's, and then you've got the yucca, which is like such a hardy, tough, hard-working plant.
That's true, the yakka.
I wonder if there's a relationship between yakka and yucca.
Well, there we go.
Mm.
Possibly. So there's a couple of meanings and origins of Australian words and idioms.
Cool, yeah. I'm not sure. Zach, yeah, that's an interesting one. I can't imagine myself using that because it would be just, I guess something that I didn't grow up with, so I wouldn't use that. But that's the first time I heard that word. Besides, Zach, I've heard of a name.
Yeah.
Somebody's
No,
name.
I've
But
never heard of a Zach. Not with a Zach, yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas I guess people might say not with a cracker these days. There's a similar sort of connotation, yeah.
Yeah, ain't worth a dime, yeah.
All right, but anyway, some great meanings, and I've got pages and pages full of them. Thanks to the
Cool. So
Australian
you're going to
National
bring them.
University.
You're going to bring some more to us next episode.
Absolutely. A bit like you're sharing some of the numbers, I thought I'd share some more meanings and origins.
Sounds like a fantastic deal to me.
Yeah, and they've got a bibliography of Australian English. They've got Australian place nicknames, some of which are very funny, and of course I can't say on air, which are a bit terrible. And, things like, what do you call Adelaide? Well, not Melbourne, or it's Bendigo with trams, or, Mel Boring, or Mel this. Anyway, so awesome, very interesting ones. But I'm going to do the meanings and origins next time as well. So that's enough news. Let's talk about our author interview.
And that's interesting. You just said that there was a meaning there that you didn't want to say over air, which is kind of something that we were discussing about. Obviously, we're going to put our serious songs on now.
Yes, indeed.
Because today's guest, fantastic guest, kind enough to reveal a lot, and has obviously, her book's very important and powerful. But it did inspire us to think about, things we write that we may not talk. But please do tell us about the wonderful guest you had the opportunity of interviewing.
Okay, so Annette Janic has worked as a television production and programs acquisition professional in genres ranging from live sport to documentaries, game shows, lifestyle and reality, and travelling extensively and living in Australia, Singapore, Dubai and India. She is also, and this is, relevant to the book that she's published, she's a first-generation Australian with parents and an older brother who arrived as refugees following World War One. So Annette's book is Warchild, Survival, Betrayal, Secrets. And she's written this with the help of Catherine McCulloch, and we've got some of Catherine's books on the Australian Booklovers website as well. The reason that we want you to be a little bit more aware of this interview is that we do want to issue a couple of trigger warnings. So Annette's book talks about Nazi Germany, and I'll give a more comprehensive blurb in a minute, but there is talk of rape and suicide and some fairly violent happenings. So if those things are a worry for you, or if they do trigger responses that you are not comfortable with, then maybe just flick to the end of the episode and have a listen to some of the book reviews that we've got, or wait till you after the interview. But if you're able to listen to those things, then I really encourage you to listen to Annette's story, because it is incredibly courageous of her to write this memoir about her mother. So Warchild is a true story that spans 100 years, and it reveals agonising choices against the backdrop of Nazi Germany, the lingering effects of war, the 1950s Australian migration experience, and a modern-day search. So Annette's mum, Magdalena, is an illegitimate child born in a small town steeped in superstition in pre-World War II Germany. Denounced as a source of shame by her devoutly Catholic grandfather and the narrow-minded townspeople, Lenny and her mother eke out a living dogged by poverty and prejudice in a country moving inexorably towards war. With the advance of the Red Army, Lenny and her family are stripped of their possessions and forced to survive on their wits, transforming Lenny into a meek, cowed girl to breadwinner and protector. She becomes a member of the Hitler Youth, while at the same time puzzling over the disappearance of her Jewish friend. Forced to leave school at 14, she's confronted with the terrible choice of submitting to secret systemic rape by her employer or having her mother interned. So there are other things that the story goes on to talk about, and Annette really shares the story of her mother, and working with Catherine McCulloch, she shapes Warchild into a memoir that is about vulnerability, it's about courage, it's about, so many things. And why do people write such difficult stories? We're incredibly privileged to hear those. And I don't know, the key to memoirs is, why do people write it? Look, it's a legacy for future generations, and that's certainly some of the reason that Annette tells us, and I won't go into that. She'll tell us how that works. It helps you take your place in history. You can better understand your life's journey. It helps you establish connections, and it can actually give you a new sense of purpose. If people have a story or a family story that they need to write down, then I'd really encourage them to do that, even if you don't necessarily publish it, but just exploring that. And we so often wish that we'd spoken to our elder relatives and asked them more of those stories, which, many of them who lived through the various wars that we've had in the last 100 years, or 100 and more years now, of course, then, we've lost so many of those stories, which are the development and the lives of people that have been important to us. And the way people present and always makes me think of that kind of iceberg analogy with we only see the 10% of people. And, Annette and I talked about that in the interview as well. So, it's interesting what we can use as a story to tell a story. So you and I talked about fiction also being used to explore secrets and emotions and stories.
I think literature in general. I think a story like Warchild is so important because symbolically to me it means keeping a much needed candle lit, so that if you ever do want to look behind you, i.e. into the past, then the mistakes and the successes of the past are still there to be found. Because if they're not recorded, if somebody shies from the truth when it comes to something they want to say, then it could mean that flame, that particular candle is extinguished and never to be, ignited again. And that means there's only darkness behind us, and that means, future mistakes can be made. It's interesting that it's, obviously is a impactful book and a very meaningful book, but here we are at the time of recording, we're only a week or two away from Anzac Day, which is, for how many Australians celebrate it as a public holiday, and how many people, when I say celebrate, enjoy the fact that there's a day off. And it doesn't, for most people, it doesn't really mean much more than that. Possibly people come out of the woodworks and pretend it does, but for the most of the year, it's never mentioned until that one day. But and I think that's, for me, one of the strengths of literature is, I think we were chatting, off air, and that is that the ability to say something you would never say out loud, or you would never bring up in conversation.
And to shape some of the really uncomfortable truths and to put them in, I guess, within a boundary of a story or a book that makes them, if not palatable, readable. And, we are, very much the world at the moment, and the war that's happening in Ukraine. Just, we see the pictures and read some of those stories, and just hard to believe that we are back in an era when there is so much incredible violence against people going on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'd question whether we're back in an era. I don't think we've ever left it. It's just that the spotlight, and that's a political thing. What do we choose to look at, and what do we choose to ignore? Is this anything? Is the atrocities that are happening now, have they? Are we to believe that they haven't been happening for the last 10, 20 years? Of course they have. It's just that they're in places that maybe we don't have our attention as much. But nonetheless, look, the ability to say something I think, uncomfortable truths, hard truths, those sort of elements that sort of can make us feel uncomfortable. A lot of times if we bring it out in conversation, a conversation by its nature can be pretty short. And so even if you get the context of the hard truth, or it's still, I think if you put it in writing, then the readers can take that time to absorb the place of that, the place of that hard truth and the relationship it has throughout the whole story, as opposed to just a moment in time when someone tells you something and you got to try and make sense of it in that moment. But I think when it's told, whether it's in fiction or non-fiction, if those hard truths are revealed in the right circumstances when they need to be, then they come with a whole lot more connections to that journey you've taken from the time you start reading from the first page. And so there's a lot more depth to that hard truth, as opposed to just having a confronting fact thrown at you, or a confronting image, or a confronting concept. It allows a book of fiction or non-fiction, I believe, allows us to understand that hard truth a lot more, make sense of it, get our bearings, and understand what importance we can take and what lessons we can take from those hard truths, not just be aware of the discomfort it brings to us.
Too true. And look, there are, I guess, popular literary themes that are in fiction, war being one of them. If you think about kind of the top 10, I was looking at a blog by, let me just go to who the blog's by, Claire Bradshaw, who is a freelance editor and proofreader based in Newcastle in Australia, or if you are from
Adelaide,
South
it's
Australia,
Newcastle.
you might say Newcastle. Yeah. Talking about Australian words and idioms.
Yes.
So yes, Claire's website is writersedit.com, and this is the 10 most popular literary themes example. And number 10 she mentions is war, and relevant for thousands of years, from historical novels exposing the horrors of real wars to speculative fiction stories featuring epic battles between fantastical characters. So she's got war, she's got individual versus society, she's got prejudice, courage and heroism, survival, power and corruption, coming of age, good versus evil, that's a classic, death, and the top one she has is love. So, and of course, mixtures of all of that. And there's that idea that really there are only a certain amount of stories in the world, and really we're just cutting, pasting and redoing them in our own image. Still makes them incredibly useful to look at. But there is, a kind of that underlying message in stories, and it gives you a chance to explore. So in my series in Oak a Dragon, which is an epic fantasy, it's about dragons, as you can imagine, all those kind of things, but it also explores ignorance, hope, fidelity, betrayal, all those kind of things, as well as power and feminism and all those things, but wrapped up in that kind of fantasy package that doesn't necessarily make it more palatable, but for me it allows me to explain it without, having to dig into the wounds, I guess, or something. What is it that does it?
Well, that's an interesting point you bring up. I mean, it could be said that, discussions of, for example, war or war atrocities, or just those, elements of, or power, corruption, if we're talking about it in real life, it can make people very uncomfortable, and sometimes we may not want to know about it. We may want to turn away because of the discomfort. The irony is, let's use war as an example. Game of Thrones, no one wants to miss an episode. The whole thing is about combat and war. It's all about, power and struggles and, corruption. And so, and I think that's where, once again, I think that comes back to the idea that, when we explore those things in a literature format, so for example, Game of Thrones is obviously a book before it was a show, then the discomforts that are going to be had are done so within a scope where there's also those tendrils that can lead to promising things, can lead to beautiful things, positive things, a balance, as opposed to just sort of getting a brief snapshot. For me, it's like there can be a really grinding or grating part of a song if you just heard for say 3 seconds, 5 seconds, but then listening to it in the context of the 2-minute movement, it may be absolutely beautiful and still uncomfortable, but then within its proper surroundings, that discomfort is actually important. Yeah. But now, I am a shocker, I admit it. Besides, I was nearly a shocker yesterday.
Really?
I was trying to work in the back of my arcade machine, which I shouldn't have done because it was the power was on, and I went to wipe something from the fan, forgot that the power was on, nearly chopped my finger off. So that was a shocker. But a shocker for a different reason, and that is, I'd like to share with our listeners a very quick article that I read while having a little bit of a look into discomfort and the importance of telling, I guess, uncomfortable truths in literature.
Okay.
But I forgot to write down who it was, so I do apologise for not making those.
If anybody recognises their work, please let us know, and we will acknowledge you. And we'll try and put it in the show notes.
Yeah, if I can find it again. But anyway, so the article was basically about discomfort or uncomfortable truths. So when it comes to literature, so it reads, want to connect with your readers, make them uncomfortable. Great writing isn't always supposed to make us feel warm and fuzzy. A lovingly defaced, well-worn, dog-eared book is the mark of a memorable read. Think about all of the literary passages you've bathed in fluorescent yellow highlighter. You've vigorously circled sentences and marked up pages with affirmations in the margins to signify a single truth. It made you feel something, and it was likely some form of discomfort. So, yes, we want the warm and fuzzies, words that uplift us and stir our soul. We applaud the prose of optimism. We clutch those books to our chest that have life-affirming mantras. Of course, we want neat, tidy, happy endings. But some of the most effective writing also makes us feel a bit unsettled and shift in our seats. It makes us confront truths that we don't want to hear, or perhaps didn't know we needed to hear. There is an inherent connection with writing that has an undercurrent of unease. So not sold on the idea of making your readers uncomfortable? So this author promises it's a worthwhile objective. As either a reader or writer, or both, here's what connecting to uncomfortable writing says about you. It shows that you have compassion and empathy. It forces you to examine your own shortcomings and prejudices. It augments your worldview by exposing you to new situation and context. And it instills gratitude for what you already have. So we connect with uncomfortable writing that punches our gut, elevates our thinking, and transports us. In short, we feel the words in a physical, intellectual, and emotional content. So some of the most memorable writing you've probably read has applied different dimensions of discomfort, pain, anxiety, uneasiness, even guilt. So here's a brief example of how the texture and tone of words can foster connection with readers in 3 distinct ways. So when it comes to physical discomfort, so the author of this article says, consider this excerpt from Nicholas Kristof's New York Times editorial, where sweatshops are a dream. This is a Dante-like vision of hell. It's a mountain of festering refuse, a half-hour hike across emitting clouds of smoke from subterranean fires. The miasma of toxic stink leaves you gasping. Breezes batter you with filth, and even the rats look forlorn. Then the smoke parts and you come across a child ambling barefoot, searching for old plastic cups that recyclers will buy for 5 cents a pound. Many families actually live in shacks on this smoking garbage. So that's an idea of how words can sort of install a little bit of physical discomfort. When it comes to intellectual discomfort, there is a passage from Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye that illustrates a little bit of a intellectual discomfort point. We were so beautiful when we stood aside her ugliness. Her simplicity decorated us. Her guilt sanctified us. Her pain made us glow with health. Even her waking dreams were used to silence our own nightmares. So it's interesting sort of passage to highlight what can be, intellectual discomfort or can cause that. And when it comes to emotional discomfort, there is, a passage which is from Paul Kalanithe's celebrated memoir, When Breath Comes Air, which is basically a message from a dying father to, I believe, his daughter. So that message is simple. When you come to one of the many moments in life when you must give an account of yourself, provide a ledger of what you have been and done and meant to the world. Do not, I pray, discount that you filled a dying man's days with a sated joy, a joy unknown to me in all my prior years, a joy that does not hunger for more and more, but rests satisfied. In this time, right now, that is an enormous thing. So yeah, just a couple of examples there. So I appreciate the article and appreciate those books that we were able to quote from. That I think it did reach out to me a little bit of the power of words to invoke certain emotions that we could consider uncomfortable or discomfort, and yet also carry such importance, which I think is the theme I've taken from today when it comes to this amazing interview.
Yeah, it really comes back to what I always feel that writing or reading gives us. It can entertain, it can educate, or it can stir the emotions. Those are the 3 E's for me. And sometimes it does all 3, and sometimes I've read too many that challenge me emotionally, and I just want to read something really lighthearted. Give me a paranormal romance and wolf shifters or something, and let me just get a really light skip across something that's written well, or let me talk about snarky dragons. And then there are other times when I'm reading a memoir of I can't think what it is now. I'll have to look it up and tell you. But anyway, I'm reading a memoir about an Australian Indigenous woman who's done some absolutely amazing things with her life that had me kind of, reaching for my tissues on the first pages. And I think, that's so, triggering, is to think of what that emotion means to me. And it also reminds me that when I'd written my first fantasy book, people said, well, you could tell it was yours because it's kind of what your core message is anyway. And I go, hang on a minute, I've written a fantasy. What do you mean? Because as a coach and a leadership facilitator and all those kind of things, I said, well, it's really just you coaching these characters to do what you do when you coach people anyway, which is to believe in themselves and to use the tools and strengths and the inner abilities to live their best life. I go, really? I thought I was inventing something really good as a fantasy writer, but no, apparently not. Apparently I'm just living and writing about the core message in my own life.
And of course, the core message that you formulate and put together and build brick by brick and word by word is made up of many comfortable and uncomfortable truths, isn't it? So,
yeah, absolutely.
And the goal, of course, is to be, to have that communication, very clear communication. And I say that because on a lighter note, to highlight how important it is for clear communication, the reason why I nearly chopped off my finger last night with my head stuck in the back of an arcade machine is because the instruction manual that was sent with this special PCB board was written in half kind of a very, an odd English, and which eventually caused me to snip some wires as per instructions. Only I found out that the instructions were incorrect, and so
not the blue wire.
I've cut the wrong wires. I've been bleeding everywhere, and that's all because the communication wasn't clear. So, and I think that's obviously goes without saying that when it comes to, that's on the lighter side of things, but obviously on the serious side, that's I think another feature of these such important tales and reflections to be told, because this. In general, the effort that goes into a book is so much more than a brief article on the internet, and so you're more likely to find a lot of truth, or at least subjective truth or a subjective experience based in truth than what we can find in brief snapshots on the internet. And so I think in that respect, books such as Warchild and any biography or non-fiction testament to, or even fiction to times gone by or to uncomfortable things we need to know about, they're always going to carry a lot more truth just as a default, I think, which is a beautiful platform to begin with.
I think that's all very... it's a great segue into Annette's interview. So why don't we go over to listen to Annette Janic talking about Warchild.
I think that's a fantastic idea.
Hello, Australian book lovers, and welcome to another author interview we have with us today, and I'm absolutely delighted to have Annette Janic. Annette, along with her co-author Catherine McCulloch, is the author of Warchild, Survival, Betrayal, Secrets. And Annette is coming to us today from the lands of the Gadigal people in Sydney. Welcome, Annette.
Thank you very much, Veronica. It's lovely to be able to share this with you.
It is an incredibly moving story, and I'll mention today, of course, people, I am coming to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people here in Victoria. It's been a freezing morning, but the sun is coming out today, and it's a great time to do some thinking about the really important themes that are in your story. If I could just read the byline for people who may not know what Annette's book is about yet. Warchild is a true story that spans 100 years. It's a tale of Nazi Germany, the lingering effects of war, the 1950s Australian migration experience, and a modern-day search. So, Annette, there is so much in that story. Tell us a little bit about where you began.
Well, it was intended to be an historical biography, but it morphed into a memoir. So the last little bit about this modern day twist or mystery was never intended. The story really was my mother's life growing up in Nazi Germany, the post-war years, migrating to Australia, and that is really where it was going to end. But it was through that process that I discovered that she was quite the secret keeper, and she had what I now call an ultimate secret that she actually took to her grave. Her best friend revealed it to myself and my brother after she died. And I was then left, I inherited this ultimate secret, and I was left to research and try and uncover more about it. So we have this modern day twist at the end of this story, which is only a few chapters, but it needed to be included because it highlighted my mother's entire journey and what a woman would go through to protect those she loved the most at the expense of her own freedom and happiness. So it did end up being, like it had an ending that I wasn't expecting.
Right. So why did you begin writing? What was the trigger or the inspiration for the story to begin with?
Look, the trigger really, it was a culmination of many, many years of my mum telling me stories as I was growing up. You know, when I was very young, her English was still quite limited. She couldn't read or write English. And so when I came home from school with my nursery rhymes and storybooks, she wasn't able to read them to me. So in lieu of that, she would tell me stories of her own that I believed were fairy tales. They were so fantastical and colourful because she had grown up in a part of Germany that was quite superstitious. So her stories involved, Gothic castles and witches and warlocks and clairvoyance and spells, right through to the other end of the spectrum when she described soldiers in shiny black jackboots who would go marching down the street singing songs and kids would follow after them. Or she would describe a symbol called the swastika or a man named Hitler. To my young ears, that could be nothing but fairy tales.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I reached high school and learned a bit about World War II that I discovered that those were true stories. She wasn't making that up at all. And then as I got older and she revisited her stories many times, they would gradually become more adult-like in description, and she'd reveal a little bit more. But it wasn't until she was, quite elderly and had lots of health issues, and I think she thought she might not have got through this particular medical procedure that she needed. She revealed to me that she had been raped through those war years. And she told me who it was. It was a leading Nazi Party member in her small village who was also a tailor and had employed her as his young apprentice. So I knew from reading a little bit about rape that when a victim is attacked by somebody they know, generally it happens more than once. And I asked her how many times, thinking she would only say twice. And to this day, I don't know why I thought twice, other than it was probably all that I could bear to hear. But she said nearly every day for 5 years. And that was kind of this lightning bolt moment for me. I thought, you know, you've got this this wealth of stories built up in your head that she's been telling you since you've been 5 years old. It's culminated in this. No one should get to the end of their lives and have that happen to them, and then it means nothing. So it kind of really spurred me on to document her life and what had happened.
It is an amazing story to tell, and what courage she had to finally share that with you.
Yeah, it did take a lot of courage. And you know, it was a combination of a few things as well. I had this first draft written, and a few of my friends read it and convinced me that I should do something with it, that it was a story that needed to be told beyond family. And then I also heard this talk by Dr. Brené Brown. She was talking on the subject of vulnerability, because I was feeling extremely vulnerable about sharing such a personal tale. And in that TED talk, Dr. Brown said that allowing oneself to be vulnerable is actually a sign of courage. So I thought, okay, do it, Annette, jump in the deep end, be courageous, just, you know, go for it and see what happens. So that also sort of spurred me on to get started on this.
And so with friends urging you on, what happens next? You've got a draft and you've thought that this needs to be a book somewhere?
Urged me on. No, at that point, I wasn't sure. I didn't really think it would. I really thought at that point it might just be a document that I had that my brother and I could share and keep for, you know, our families.
Posterity,
yeah. So, you know, it kind of took a little bit more convincing. And I was introduced to Catherine McCulloch, who is an author in her own right, a script editor. She ghostwrites stories. She read that first draft and loved it, and you know, decided to help me bring it alive and get it to a point of taking it to a publisher. So it was then this process between Catherine and I, where I would work on a few chapters, email them to her. She lives in Canberra, I'm in Sydney, and she would come back to me with recommendations or suggestions, or, you know, where we needed to fact check things to make sure my mum had remembered events correctly. And it was this backwards, forwards process. And with some chapters, they must have gone backwards and forwards about 25 times. Oh. And they were also, tragically, the most, difficult chapters in my mother's life. And even though I knew what was coming, I knew the story, you know, seeing it materialize on paper and having to reread it over and over and over, I just could, you know, the tears would be streaming down my eyes as I'd have to do it. And I got to the point where I thought, Annette, you know, why are you beating yourself up about this? Just let it go. But at the same time, this other little voice in my head was going, well, no, hang on, you've inherited this remarkable story. It's one of our Australian post-war migrant stories. A lot of them have been untold. You've got one that you should share. It's like a lot of different themes just got thrown up at me. It was the story of a young Aryan girl's point of view. And, you know, we had always been led to believe that the young, tall, blonde, blue-eyed specimens, that Aryan specimen, as what the Nazis referred to, were the protected species. It had never occurred to me that was not necessarily the case. So it was a story of a Nazi abusing a little Aryan girl that we don't often hear. and and the war crimes that these Nazis got away with after the war, and victims were left traumatized for the rest of their lives. You just don't hear World War II stories often from that point of view. So all of that kept me motivated.
And who was your support crew? I imagine that reliving some of these really difficult themes and chapters and memories over and over must have been a real drain on you emotionally. What was your support team like?
Well, it really was only my brother, because I felt that he was the only one who could really understand it, So, I'd kind of, bounce a few ideas off of him, and, should I include this, shouldn't I? But he was really supportive. He just thought, if you're going to do it, expose it all.
Yeah.
So he was my biggest support.
And your mum did get to see the first draft of your story.
She did, but really it was only a document at that point. I wouldn't even have called it a manuscript draft. And, it was, again, when she came out with what had happened to her in its entirety, I just did a brain dump and got all those stories out of my head onto paper. Mm-hmm. And I got her to fact check it to make sure that I'd remembered names and dates and events correctly. So she did, she ticked off on it. But that's all it really was at that point. She didn't know, I didn't know that it might end up as a book. I had no aspirations at that point. But I'm sure she must have been thinking in the back of her mind, what is my daughter doing this for? So it was after she died that I actually, got serious about getting it published. And that was at the convincing of my friends.
Well, they are good friends to have persuaded you to put this out in the world.
Mm.
Yes.
Yes.
Tell me, do you know why your mum, or beg your pardon, why your mother picked Australia? Was there a reason why she came to Australia, or was there a choice?
There was a choice. My mum was married at that point and had my brother, who was born in Germany, and they came out under the International Refugee Organisation program, and there was a choice. Why I think they chose Australia, along with a lot of European migrants, was the climate sounded fabulous. And it was also as far away from Europe as they could possibly get. They were obviously so traumatized. They just wanted to get as far away from Europe. So it was that combination of climate and distance.
Mm. And some of them would have found themselves in almost another world, going out to the Bonegilla Migrant Centre down in...
totally. It was.
Yeah.
It was in the middle of
of nowhere. Still is a little bit, although Wodonga's creeping out there.
Yeah, exactly. It is.
Yeah.
Look, it was quite a shock to a lot of them. And again, this is some of the stories that you don't necessarily hear, but I kind of uncovered them as I was researching this period of Australia's history. Some of the single men in particular who had come out without wives or families, they were on their own, and had been led to believe that Australia was the country that was going to be a fabulous new start. Everything would be fabulous. And it wasn't necessarily the case. It was really hard for them to assimilate. Assimilation is a very difficult thing. There weren't the support services that there are now. And, for some of these guys, it was just the final straw. They could not deal with it and they committed suicide. Mm. And there's a string of those events and you just don't hear it in Australia's history. So, it's a lot that we still don't talk about from that period that really needs to be explored, in my opinion.
There have been so many different filters put on the past that not only just World War II, but, thinking about our Indigenous populations, that, that selective filtering of history has a lot to answer for.
It does indeed, yeah.
Thinking about the way World War II is, shared in history, to put more personal stories in it would be incredibly powerful.
Well, I think so. When I did learn about World War II, and this is now going back, quite a few years, it was from a very kind of military historian point of view. So there were a lot of facts and figures and, names of events and things that just didn't even stick in my brain. And it wasn't until, more recently when I started on this book and read a lot around it that I just became more appreciative of the individual and unique stories and points of view. And I think, maybe that's what we need to do when we teach kids history now, make that history more personalized, so the kids are kind of living through it from a very ordinary person's point of view, and I think it will resonate with them more. The information will stick, and it will be more interesting to them.
Absolutely.
So we just need to rethink how history, in particular war history, is taught.
I think change also in messaging is so important. If you have the facts, if you have the emotion, and if you give people a pathway forward to read those things, or to a framework to put them in. So stories about ordinary people, they are never ordinary. The people that you live with, or the people that live next door, have these extraordinary lives if you let yourself listen and if you ask them to go deeper.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I'm at the point where I'd love to know so much more about all of my neighbours now, because I'm certain, every single one of them has something very interesting about their backgrounds. But, we just we don't go there.
Where did you go for your research, apart from having your mother's memories and doing, your own sort of research with her? What other things did you do to flesh out, I guess, the story behind?
Well, it really was relying on her memory more than anything. And where, Catherine might have identified a part that needed a bit of fact checking, or, I'd then just read up around that particular incident or event. But, 90% of it was just relying on her extraordinary memory and her extraordinary story skills, and just getting that down on paper. But more recently, a historian in Poland has reached out to me after reading this book. The book was translated into German and went on sale there a while ago. And the village where my mother had grown up, which was once Germany, is now Poland. So this historian reached out to me and she said, Annette, I've read the book. I'm fascinated by it because I'm learning more about my own town pre-war. I only ever knew it, post-war.
Right.
All the original buildings, or 80% of the original buildings, were destroyed by the Russians as they came through that part of Germany. So, a lot of it was rebuilt in the communist brutalist block style architecture. However, she did say that some of the buildings existed as my mother had described them, and certain little monuments or whatever were still there. So that was quite interesting from a research point of view, although it was too late to include it in my book. If there's ever a book two, I will certainly sort of embellish on all of that.
Ah, very good. Or you could always do a second edition and add some more bits and pieces.
Good. Yeah, that's another way to tackle it. Very good thought.
What feedback have you received, comments and thoughts about the book?
I have lots of different things, but the most valuable kind of feedback is where it has inspired others to, start to write their own family histories or stories. And in most cases, it's just for their family, just to sort of document stories. And when I hear that, I kind of feel like, well, that's great. This story has inspired others into action, which is fabulous. And even if it goes nowhere else other than their own family, I just, it's important to sort of hand down those family experiences for future generations. So, that's been the best kind of feedback for me.
Yeah, it is fantastic and such an important thing to share. And my husband and I are, currently madly, and he's been madly into family tree and genealogy for a long time. But I said, well, why don't you have a look at my family? And we found one particular, they were just newly out. The first child was born in Ireland and they came out and ended up having 10 children. But when we looked at the dates, realised that over a fortnight, 3 children died. And when we looked it up, we found that it been a scarlet fever epidemic in Victoria. They lived out in country Victoria, and so you can then just add an extra layer to the whole life of these people. I thought, oh yeah, there she is. She's had 10 kids, started 15, whatever. But now it's like, now she has that to take with her. And I imagine that what happened to your mother as a child, of course, influenced all the way through how she lived her life, how she brought you and your brother up, how she interacted with people.
Yeah, look, possibly, but I also think she was quite the chameleon.
Okay.
Yeah, look, she was a very happy-go-lucky, life of the party, warm, loving. Everybody had, good things to say about her kind of person. Mm-hmm. And when I discovered more about her life and the abuse, in particular through the war years, so she was kind of 14 to 19 when she was getting abused every day. I just wonder, how could she have ended up being this warm, happy, lucky, going, loving person? Because it could have easily gone the other way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So somewhere in her brain or heart or soul or spirit, she was able to sort of, just closet that away and get on with life. I think that is what happened, or maybe she was just covering up the whole time. I really don't know. I'm not too sure. But I didn't feel as though her experiences affected how she acted or brought me up. I had a very normal, loving upbringing. So I'm still kind of, and this is where one of those times where you wish that your parents were still here, so you can ask them all those questions. Like,
that sense of how come
I know everything. How did you do it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. What an amazing woman. The cover of Warchild has the most beautiful photo on it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that photo was actually a tiny little black and white that was blown up for the cover, and it was only one of a handful of photos that my mother managed to save through her escape, because when the Russians were coming through that part of Germany, the villagers were only given 24 hours notice. So they literally had to, pack what they could put into one small suitcase. They also had restrictions on weight and how much they could carry on the various transports out of the village. And she managed to, grab a small handful of photographs, and this was one of them. And it's her as a young 4-year-old with my grandmother reading the newspaper. But I love it because it's almost that foreboding look in her eyes of the tragedy that was ahead, and there was going to be nothing she could do about it. It just, I don't know, it just has this, it's almost like it's a posed photograph.
Yes, but it's so
for a book cover, but it's not. But it's not. I would have loved to have known who the photographer was. And likewise, on the back, it's another blow up of a small black and white photograph that she had, her as a teenager, my grandmother now older, and her 2 much younger brothers. Mm-hmm. And they're standing in front of an old iron fence, which does still exist, according to my Polish researcher.
Excellent.
Yes, excellent. It's a fence around Dr. Funk's Pedagogium, and you'll need to Google Pedagogium.
Pedagogium. I'm going to write that one down. Oh, very good. Tell us a little bit about your travels with Big Sky Publishing, because they are they're an independent publisher, and what happened with them? Yeah, look, for me, it was a pretty good experience, and I think I owe that to Catherine McCulloch, who already had a relationship with them. Catherine's edited many books, mostly with a war theme to them, and that's sort of what Big Sky specialise in, military history. They do have a kids division as well, but the military history is kind of their specialty. And because Warchild was written, or partly written, against the Nazi Germany backdrop, Catherine thought that they would be interested. So when we got the manuscript to a point of pitching, she did that on my behalf, and lo and behold, they were. So I had a very good
experience, but I know it's not as easy for a lot of other aspiring authors because there's lots of setbacks and,
Yes.
hard work along the way.
Can be, but it was not a short journey for you and Catherine. How long did it take to get the book from that first?
It still took about 2 years, and that was because we were both, we had other paid jobs that we had to devote time to. So this is kind of like, weekends or periods of time where, it might have been holidays or whatever that we could devote to it after hours in the evening. Had it not been for that, I think this would have taken it still would have taken about 9 months to 12 months. But it doubled that because there were interruptions along the way.
Full-time jobs will do that, won't they? Take away your creative space.
They will, yeah.
What's the most useful writing advice you've been given?
It really is just to start writing, stop procrastinating, just start. And even if it's with a little idea or a small sentence, just kind of get it down on paper and then see where it goes. And you might find that it takes you in several different directions. But one of those directions will eventually exhibit or show itself to be the strongest direction. And that's then the path you should follow. But really is just start with a small sentence and then let yourself go.
Yeah, let the words come. Are there any more words coming? Have you got another book in you?
I have, and it's off the back of this one. This ultimate secret that I inherited did, sort of pivot me off into a different direction. And that direction kind of took me into, what we'll call the Eastern Bloc countries and what people did to escape Bulgaria. They didn't want to live under communism after World War II. So it's all of those escape stories that sort of then lead into the Cold War era and, possibly Vietnam and how that was part of this Cold War exercise. So I'm sort of grappling with ideas for that. And I don't have enough fact for that, though, at the moment, which is why I'm grappling. So it might be that I have to create some fictional characters, but would be written against a factual history.
Okay. There are some great reviews of Warchild, particularly on the Big Sky publishing website. And I think the words harrowing and moving, the experiences of a mother and daughter. So it's not a happy story to read, but there are incredible inspirations to be drawn from sharing that courageous life.
Yeah, yes, it's definitely not a sexy, happy story. It is quite black in parts. And my advice to readers is to either have a box of tissues or a bottle of red wine nearby.
Both of which would be good, yes.
Or both, to cope with some of those difficult parts.
Yeah.
So it's, maybe it's not a story for everybody, for that reason, but it is life. It is what can happen in life. And, we weren't going to hold anything back. If you're going to tackle something like this, you just got to be true to the story and go for it.
Yeah. Tell me, what is your ideal reader? Who would you love to read this story?
I've thought about this quite a bit, and this is very aspirational, but I think Kate Blanchett would be perfect. And it's the tone of her voice, it's the sense of empathy she can bring when she reads or, in her scripts. She has, a certain authority in her voice. Pronunciation is wonderful. Enunciation is wonderful. So I think she would be my pick.
She would bring a beautiful gravitas to it, wouldn't she?
Yes, I think so. I think so. And just show the empathy in the places where that needs to be shown.
Yeah. And where can people find your story? Where's the best place for them to purchase it?
Well, I don't have a blog or anything, so really it's the Big Sky Publishing website or any bookstore can order it in. Amazon, the Book Depository, those sorts of online places, they all have it available.
Beautiful. And any final words for readers?
Wow, final words for readers. I've not been asked that before. I just think keep an open mind and, read it and learn.
Mm. And wouldn't it be good if there were teachers of history out there or policymakers who said, you know what, this needs to be on the history curriculum?
Yeah, it would be. And, I say that sincerely because, as I alluded to before, I think history is not a subject that is often taught correctly in schools. It is just there's too much, theory or factual information that just doesn't stick with kids. But if you can link it to a very personalised story, I'm sure children will remember and possibly learn better from that sort of approach.
And it has been an incredible journey, obviously, for you. And thank you so much for sharing the courage and the vulnerability of your mum's story with us today.
Pleasure, Veronica. I'm happy to be able to do it.
Lovely. And we are going to finish up with a little reading from Annette. So don't go anywhere, book lovers. Thank you very much for joining us today, Annette.
Thank you.
Annette, thank you so much for being part of the Australian Booklovers Podcast. Thank you for such a wonderful interview with Veronica, and thank you for writing such an important book, and not only that, sharing so many important and personal matters of your heart with our listeners. Thank you. That's all I can say right now.
Yeah, and as Annette says, a box of tissues and a glass of red wine, or both, when you're having a little read of this. So it may not be and I would say uplifting, but I can't remember exactly what Annette said now, but yes, box of tissues and a glass of red wine.
Necessary doesn't always have to be uplifting.
No. But I think that's, again, a nice segue into our quotes.
Yes, okay. Well, my question is, who started the quotes last week? I can't remember.
I can't remember.
Anyway,
Probably
please,
me.
tell me your first quote.
All right. So this is one from Anne Lamott, and Anne is an American novelist. You may have heard her Bird by Bird, her book about writing, which is really interesting. You just basically got to write bird by bird. This quote is, "Writing has so much to give, so much to teach, so many surprises. That thing you had to force yourself to do, the actual act of writing, turns out to be the best part."
Oh, touche.
Yeah, I thought that fitted into Annette's journey particularly well.
And just the idea that the act of writing is ultimately the eternal gift, isn't it?
Yeah. Incredibly cathartic. I mean, we've talked about the benefits of writing before, but it's the actual act of writing is the best part. Whether you never show your story to anybody, seeing those words come on paper is amazing. Yes. All right, give me a quote. What have you got for me?
Okay, well, I've got a quote from none other than Mr. Michael Moore.
Right.
And this quote reads as follows: "The purpose of art actually is, in many cases, to make you feel quite uncomfortable, or at least go to that place that's already of discomfort inside of you and tap into that." So that's Michael Moore. Yeah. And I think that's, art has to have has to cause a response, doesn't it?
Yes.
Whatever the medium.
Whether it's delight or disgust or dismay or, whatever that is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. From one of my favourites, Maya Angelou, who was an American poet. She died in 2014. "I think each writer has her or his secret path to the muse."
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, when I thought, that's perfect. Whereas Annette talked about the trigger was, her mum's stories. What is it that for you triggered, say, the Hallucigenia project? What was the secret path to the muse that helped you pour that onto the page?
Well, who knows? But I know that for each one of us, when we discover our muse or reconnect with our muse, it's definitely not as simple as plotting the GPS coordinates and sharing it with anyone, because it just wouldn't work that way. Even if you got there, you'd be like, "But it's just a barren wasteland." It's like, no, it wasn't. Last time I was there. No, so I think you're absolutely right. I think we all have our very unique and secret ways. See. I nearly gave up secrets, but I didn't, so that's good. No, I couldn't tell you if I wanted to. Perhaps that's the best secret of all, is the one I don't have to hide. So for my second one, this is by a gentleman by the name of Peter Williams. I actually like this one. Be willing to be uncomfortable. Be comfortable being uncomfortable. It may get tough, but it's a small price to pay for living a dream.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I always laugh because I put myself into some stupid circumstances sometimes. But I've now developed the mantra that, I chose to give myself no choice. And for example, my first foray, being an ocean guy, kayaking in the river when it's at its fullest in so long. And I travelled 1.5 hours downstream as opposed to upstream, not thinking that I would have to turn around and fight a surging current. So 3 hours non-stop paddling to get back to base with no opportunity to stop anywhere. And of course, that's when I realised, no, I just gave myself a choice of having no choice. And
I like your optimism. That's excellent.
Yeah, so but to be comfortable being uncomfortable, I think that covers a whole facet of discomfort, from being uncomfortable about sitting down to write, or being uncomfortable to try something new, to taste something new, to it's basically step outside your comfort zone. Any step outside is going to be uncomfortable, isn't it? Hence the border between comfort and discomfort. But so much treasure, so many cool things to discover, I think, anyway. Yeah. Some odd things too as well, and some perhaps dangerous things, and some things that maybe are best put down on paper and not mentioned in conversation. But that's the joys of stepping outside of a comfort zone.
Look, absolutely. And don't forget, if we've put you outside your comfort zone, send us an email. Let us know what you thought, or if you loved what we chat and blather on about, please give us some likes on your podcasting platform, and you will find our podcast on all good podcasting platforms. If you give us some stars on iTunes in particular, that helps new listeners to find us. But on social media, you can find us at Australian Books, on Facebook and Instagram at Australian Booklovers. If you're an author, an Australian and Indigenous author, we'd love to have your book and list it for free. So head on over to australianbooklovers.com/for-authors, and you can list your book for free. And once your book is listed, you can hit us up for an interview as our next episode's author did. So you chatted with Michelle Layette, who's the author of From French Fries to a Franchise, which is a non-fiction memoir, which is really interesting.
Yes. So, dear readers, if you wanted to peer behind the curtains of what it is to manage McDonald's stores, or the all the chaos that happens behind the counter, and what's the real ingredients, and when did whose idea was it to get cappuccinos happening instead of the old coffee pot?
Yep. Then
look, this is a fantastic interview. It's not just about McDonald's. I think Michelle was the first female franchisee in Australia, but she has also travelled the world. Her skills in the business sector are extraordinary, and not only did she have an unbelievable run with McDonald's and has so many cool tales to tell, as who doesn't want to know the ins and outs of the McDonald's story, but not only that, also about business and about the things she's learned that we can apply to our lives today, and hence why, although she's no longer working for McDonald's, she travels the country and the world, sharing her experience and talking about all the skills she's learned and passing some of those wonderful findings and skills onto other hungry people. So hungry, excuse the pun, for McDonald's, but
Or
No,
in that other one?
it is an amazingly fun interview. So,
that's good.
I definitely look forward to sharing that with everyone for episode number 52.
Very good. And of course, if you are a reader and you're listening to hear about all the fabulous books we have, jump onto the Australian Booklovers website and go to the page that's headed Book Lovers, sign up and subscribe to our irregular, I say irregular because it's the only one I can get around to it, semi-regular newsletter. And that's full of excellent Aussie authored books and giveaways. So currently we have 2 competitions happening. We've got 2 books on the go. So if you sign up in the next few days, you are still in the running. There have been some excellent requests or the giveaways for The Bravest Word by Kate Foster, who I think you're interviewing later this week. So very timely.
I am indeed, yes. And I have a copy of the book here. So between now and then, I'm hoping to at least get a little bit of a head start on it.
Well, hopefully it's a middle grade book and you shouldn't take too long.
No, this is true. Big days ahead after the bush for Easter, and then come back and looking forward to chatting with Kate, absolutely. But I'll definitely be sneaking a read in between.
Yes, the other book that we have as a giveaway for the last newsletter is Blindness for Beginners by Mabel.
Now, that'd be a fascinating read.
Yeah, Maribel Steele, sorry, not Mabel, Maribel Steele. So, yeah, and again, just looking at some of the submissions that have come in requesting that they win that copy. Yes, so many people just love memoirs and reading about other people's stories. It's fantastic. So there you go.
I'm definitely guilty.
Yeah, you love a memoir, I know. And look, sometimes I'm good. I can read a run of them, and sometimes I think I just can't because people are so good at writing the emotion that I need a rest from it. And I need to get into some, fabulous sci-fi and shoot some spaceships out of the sky and those kind of things. So, yeah.
Or fantasies with castles.
Look, not so much the old-fashioned style of fantasy. I like a little bit of magical realism. I'm reading, listening to a book by Juliette Marilia, who was a Kiwi, now lives in Western Australia. So she's kind of one of those Kiwis that we like to own as our own. And it's called The King's Harp, which is a bit more around the Celtic mythology stuff. And that's absolutely fascinating. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff I love too. I just like lots of things.
If it has a front cover and a back cover, then you're guaranteed there's something fun in between.
I am an absolutely voracious reader, and I must say I have also just received my copy of The Teeth of a Slow Machine by Andrew Roth.
Yes.
That's
who
fantastic.
Will be a guest on our show very soon also.
Yes. So Andrew is one of our Christmas Australis storytellers, which you and I were, created that anthology. But this is an anthology of, again, there it is, more short stories. But how about that for a title, The Teeth of a Slow Machine? It's got a fantastic cover. So, I am gagging to get into that one, but I'm holding off to take it away for Easter because I've got a couple of days and we're going to go down the beach. And because my children are all grown up, I can say, go away, I'm reading. Because as our tagline suggests, and we are going to do this without any added extras, we are going to say, take care for now, and remember to read more Aussie books.
Now, speaking of Aussie, I like the idea that you're going to be travelling from, kind of the country down to the beach for Easter.
Yes.
I'll be leaving the beach, travelling to the bush for Easter. There we go. That's Australia.
It is indeed. Yeah.
And to all our listeners, have a fantastic Easter break, however you celebrate it. I mean, it is. For me, it's a very psychedelic holiday. You've got bunnies that lay eggs that is chocolate. I won't go into the.
We should be saying Bilby. Supporting the Australian Bilby.
Yes,
He's trying to ditch the Easter bunny off the shelves. Yes.
Well, yeah. Tell that to Woolies and Coles. No, so everyone have a fantastic break, whatever you choose to do, even if you just stay at home, curl up with a good book.
Yeah.
And look forward to our next episode. Will be just after Easter with the wonderful Michelle. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us for episode number 51, and take care.
Yeah, and stay tuned for a reading by Annette from her book and book review, at least one on the end. Bye for now.
My name is Annette Janic and I'm the author of Warchild. The story actually starts with this question. What would you do if you found yourself caught up in another war? I asked my mother Lenny when I was about 12 years old. Commit suicide, she replied, without batting an eyelid. Her response was so immediate that I can still remember how much it shocked me. She did not hesitate, not even for a second. I knew she had come to Australia with very little education, having endured years of poverty and mistreatment, and that she had always felt, as she put it, like everyone's punching bag. By the time I'd turned 12, I had spent countless hours listening to her stories about growing up in Nazi Germany, and I thought I knew everything there was to know. Although hers was a very sad upbringing, I was not sure that it warranted suicide. Lenny was 24 years old when she arrived in Australia on the American troop ship the General Hahn, and as she faced the prospect of a new beginning, there was little that daunted her. She was used to beginning again and had never been afflicted with the attachment to possessions. What Lenny could not have foreseen as the General Hahn came to a slow grinding halt was that Australia would become her lifelong home. She would live the rest of her life in a new suburb which sprang from the dusty sheep paddocks and slaughter yards in Adelaide's west. Lenny had possessed an inner strength that remained closeted from the outside world. This strength had allowed her to cope with the adversity of which she had known for most of her life. She had survived a harsh childhood characterised by poverty and cruelty and the trauma of a world war, but somehow she managed to bury the mental debris associated with both, or so it appeared. As I grew older and acquired an adult perspective, I realised that the stories that Lenny wove, while factually accurate, concealed almost as much as they revealed. Like most children, I thought I knew my mother well, but to use the slang of the day, I didn't know the half of it. It was only in the last few years of her life that I came to know more of what Lenny had endured, what she had merely hinted at in years gone by. She had been living with secret demons that would not leave her alone, and it had taken 67 years for her to find the courage to speak of her private agony. She was a victim of sexual abuse. I found myself engulfed by her sorrow because I could do nothing to help her, and I began to understand her immediate reaction to my youthful question over what she would do if there was another war. I began to appreciate that suicide had been an oft-contemplated option for Lenny. It was not so much the war itself that she could never face again, it was what her employer had done to her during that conflict that she could not possibly live through a second time. It has taken me years of careful research and persistent questioning to write this story. The more I delved, the more complex it became, forcing me to contemplate serious issues such as poverty, abuse, religion, migration, survival, and the lasting effects of war. These are issues that are relevant today as they were over 100 years ago when this narrative begins. And on a more spiritual level, other elements began to surface that prompted my exploration of dreams, coincidences, intuition, secrets, and searches. Lenny's greatest secret would only emerge after her death. She was one of many European refugees who arrived in Australia as migrants under the auspices of the International Refugee Organisation program, and who contributed enormously to the development of this nation. She herself was not extraordinary, not a celebrity, movie star, sports star, or politician. She was an ordinary person, but with an extraordinary story. With the passing of time, the experiences one shared by many have become the experiences of the few. And with fewer and fewer post-war migrants remaining to tell their stories, there is a risk that their sacrifices will be forgotten, confined to the pages of dusty history books, or, worse still, never known. Our history matters. It shapes our past, present and future, and to lose that history is to lose something truly special. Warchild is the story of Lenny's part in that history.
Fight Like a Girl by Clementine Ford is the kind of book you need to keep a few copies of so you can give them away to people who think gender equality is sorted, or for those who need the support of it and don't realise they are not alone. I already have mine bookmarked for my daughter, who bought it for me, by the way. Refreshing to hear the feminist call to arms from Ford and to hear it delivered with righteous anger, laughter, poise and profanity, and plenty of poignant moments of memoir. It's a great reminder that gender equality is far from a reality for most, sprinkled with facts and peppered with practical ideas for action. A great read.
Let's meet again when magic happens.
Australian Booklovers acknowledges First Nations peoples and recognises their continuous connection to country, community and to culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and honour the sharing of traditional stories passed down through generations. We're committed to a safe and inclusive welcome for authors and readers of all cultures and backgrounds, including people of LGBTQIA+ communities and their families.